How much money do you really need to feel rich or at least secure? Because while many of us dream of having millions stacked up in our bank accounts, one of the most successful investors on Shark Tank, Kevin O'Leary, says that number might be way lower than you'd ever imagine. And here's the wild part. This is coming from a guy whose net worth is around $400 million. Someone who's made a fortune through smart business moves, sharp investing, and turning himself into a financial brand. But despite all of that, he keeps reminding people of something incredibly simple. You don't need millions to live well. You need clarity. Clarity about what kind of life you want, what actually matters to you, and how much that kind of life really costs. Because here's the truth, financial freedom isn't about a fancy number. It's about figuring out what kind of lifestyle makes you feel calm, secure, and content. For some, that picture might be full of luxury sports cars, designer wardrobes, and mansions on the beach. But for others, it's about not having to worry whether the rent is due, not feeling trapped in a soul-crushing job and having the power to decide how you spend your time. Maybe you just want a cozy home, your bills covered, and the freedom to spend time with your kids or travel when you feel like it. And guess what? Those two visions have very different price tags. Which is exactly why O'Leary says you might only need a fraction of what people think to live financially free. It's not about hitting 10 million or 5 million or even 1 million. It's about making your money match your priorities. And get this, he says that with just $500,000 in savings, you could potentially stop working and still live comfortably as long as you play it smart. At first that number sounds way too small, right? Like how on earth is someone supposed to live off $500,000? But let's break it down. O'Leary says if you invest that $500,000 in stable, low-risk, income-producing assets like bonds or high-yield savings accounts, you could see an average return of around 5% a year, which means you're earning $25,000 annually without even touching the main amount. You're literally just living off the interest. And if you're a little more aggressive with your investing strategy and decide to include equities like stocks or ETFs, O'Leary says you could push that return up to around 8.5 or even 9%. Now you're talking about an income of $42,500 to $45,000 a year, again without touching the original money. And if you're thinking, well, that's not exactly luxury living, then you're right.
You have to get to a place where you have $5 million in the bank because you can survive the rest of your life no matter what happens, and your family. You can take care of a lot of people making 6 or 7% of $5 million. When you make that, you have to set that aside and you don't risk it. Then after that, you can start to take risk capital and put it to work.
But here's the thing, for a lot of people, especially those in more affordable areas or those living a modest lifestyle, that income is enough to live with dignity and peace of mind. If you own your home or have low monthly expenses, that annual income could cover the basics and a bit more. No, you're not eating out at Michelin star restaurants or flying first class every week, but you're not scraping by either. You've got enough to live decently, and most importantly, you're not trading hours of your life for a paycheck anymore. And for many people, that's the ultimate goal, getting your time back. Imagine waking up without an alarm clock because you don't have to clock in anywhere. Imagine making choices based on what you want, not what you're obligated to do. That's where real freedom begins, and O'Leary's strategy shows that with careful planning, that kind of life is absolutely possible. Now here's a bonus layer that makes the picture even more realistic. O'Leary doesn't talk about this much, but let's say you're eligible for Social Security benefits, which is pretty standard for most Americans. The average monthly payout is about $1,900 per person. That's nearly $23,000 a year, and for a couple, it's over $45,000 of guaranteed income before you even touch your investments. Stack that on top of the returns from a $500,000 portfolio, and suddenly you're looking at a lifestyle that's not just sustainable, but actually pretty comfortable. And here's the key takeaway in all of this. Most people think they're chasing wealth, but what they're really chasing is freedom. They think they need Lamborghinis and penthouses, but what they actually crave is control over their time, their energy, and their life. And if that's the real goal, then you don't need to be rich in the traditional sense. You need to be strategic. And this is where most people mess it up. O'Leary's seen it time and time again. People finally get their hands on a large chunk of money, maybe from savings or inheritance, and instead of being smart with it, they pour it into someone's dream business, their brother's bar, a friend's restaurant, maybe a bowling alley. And what does Kevin say about that in his usual blunt style? He calls it crap, not because he's mean, but because he's realistic. These kinds of ventures fail all the time. They're risky, hard to scale, and way too unpredictable. Unless you have deep industry experience, they're not investments, they're gambles. And when your goal is to live off your money long term, gambling isn't a strategy. Your priority has to be capital preservation, not chasing flashy windfalls. The mission is not to double your money in 6 months. It's to make it last for the rest of your life. But here's another twist. If you're planning to live off passive income for decades, there's one more thing you can't ignore, and that's inflation. Even if you're earning 5 to 9% returns, if your portfolio just sits at $500,000 forever, the money you earn will slowly lose purchasing power as prices rise, which means your lifestyle will shrink unless your portfolio grows with it. So what's Brig this week?
Ideally, you want your investments to grow by at least 3% annually, just to keep pace with inflation. That way your income keeps increasing, along with the cost of living, and you're not losing ground every year. And this is where born consistent strategies actually win over flashy ones. A diversified portfolio that balances stocks and bonds and holds long term isn't exciting, but it works. It's stable and predictable, and that's what gives you peace of mind in the long run. Most people think they need to keep grinding, keep building, keep chasing higher numbers, but what they really need is a shift in mindset. Once you hit a point where your investments support your lifestyle, you don't need to keep climbing. You can maintain, and that's powerful. The real question isn't how much money it takes to be rich. It's how much money it takes to feel secure and fulfilled, and that number will be different for everyone. For some, it's being able to wake up in a debt-free home. For others, it's knowing they can buy a flight to see their family without checking their bank balance. But whatever your version is, the lesson is the same. Once you define what enough looks like, you can actually build a plan to get there. And most of the time, it's way more achievable than you thought. The truth is, most people don't realize how much they're spending on stuff that doesn't really add value to their life. Impulse purchases, expensive subscriptions, car payments for vehicles they barely drive. And when they cut back, not only do their expenses drop, their quality of life often goes up. People who cook at home, downsize their home, or switch to a used car often discover something unexpected. They feel lighter, freer, like they're finally in control again. And that's what real financial independence offers. Not just fewer bills, but more mental clarity and more choices in your everyday life. And no, it won't land you on the cover of Forbes, but it might let you live without alarms, without deadlines, and without the constant stress of wondering how you'll pay for your next meal. And in a world full of noise and hustle and comparison, that kind of quiet confidence is the ultimate wealth.
It's almost impossible to make your first $1 million. You work your ass off. It's so hard. And what it really takes to do is to have the discipline of not buying shit you don't need. To make that first $1 is you got to invest it. Market's going to make you 8%. And then I thought, well, my sights are on 5. It's going to be impossible. It wasn't as hard to get to 5 as it was to 1. Then 50 was my next goal. I said, if I can get to 5, why can't I get to 50? This may sound insane, but to get to 50, you just have to love what you're doing. Once you're an entrepreneur and you're building a business and you're at it every day, I woke up one day and went, shit, there it is. And then the Hunsky is the next one. You know, it's sort of like
savage.
And then there comes a point where, well, I don't need any more money. This is good. I need more time. Because the whole deal, the reason you work your ass off is to be free. That's the whole point.